All right, welcome to your Tuesday online lesson for art. This week we'll be doing your VTS discussion at home so that you have more time Wednesday to do your project. And forgive my hoarse voice that I have suddenly, but we'll get through this lesson anyway. All right, so here's our first image that we're going to look at. Make sure that your beginning part of your student notes page is filled out. If it's not, then go ahead and fill out the student information section. Pause the video real quick. But if it is, let's go ahead and continue. Okay, so what is the first thing we notice about this? Probably you're going to say there's black figures on this big pottery bowl container thing. And you would be correct. There are a lot of black figures on this. So that's one thing you can write for a visual detail and your observation. Also, we notice that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, almost 7 layers, different sections of this. So that's another thing we can notice. And each of those sections has different images in it, and there's a bunch. Another thing we can notice is what? There's a combination of people and horses and animals. Now this thing does have a back also to it and a front, clearly. So we'll look at that real quick. So we'll let you get a little bit more information. Here's the side we just looked at. It's a little bit shattered, and has some places that are missing. So another observation would be that this is pretty old. You can write that down. Anything else that you see, the chariots, you have some war scenes going on here maybe. There's also a scene of some people fighting a boar here, killing a boar. We have some, looks like some mythological creatures right here. And on this side as well, over here, there is some people. Looks like a big gathering over on this area. Royalty around here. So there's lots of different things. Here's some critter killing a deer, looks like, over here. So there's lots of things to notice about this. You may also notice that this has a little bit of resemblance to some Egyptian art, like the people, on especially this side over here, and they're sideways figures. But there's also a bunch of dress styles that are definitely not Egyptian, and those would be more Greek, maybe even some Roman customs in there. So you should have plenty of information now for your visual details. Here's a close-up picture of one of the horses. They even got some writing right here. Horses look like they're quite toned, a little bit skinny. Okay, so let's move on. This is the name of the piece. So let's go ahead and start filling out some of our paper real quick. It's this is not pronounced Francoise, it's Francois. Okay, the Francois vase. So for your artwork title, this is what's going to be used for the title for your art painting as well. It's Francois vase. Make sure you spell it correctly. And here is the person who created it. Now there's two people here, and I'll go ahead and tell you why. That is because there are Gatomos. He is the one that actually did the artwork, and this other guy is the one that actually did the pottery part. And sometimes they were one and the same person, but this time they were not. And we'll talk about how we know who actually created this artwork in a little while. Here's the completion date. 570 to 565 BC is when they date this to have been made, around in that time. So that's also the date or period that the artwork was completed. And the medium used is pottery. We're going to leave it as pottery. And let's see. So you should have the artist or the people group under the artist facts. So let's put his name on there. And we will continue reading this and see if we can fill out some of the other information. Okay, so the Francois vase, it's a wonderful representation of Greek pottery with influence from Egyptian art, like we had talked about. So this is a Greek piece. So it was inspired by earlier bronze vases, and it was used to hold wine and display images that were culturally relevant at that time. And a lot of this is probably the mythology and stuff. So As far as the artist's date of birth or the era that this was made in, we're going to write in ancient Greek for that because we do not know the artist's date of birth. Just going to tell you that now. It's kind of impossible. And the purpose of this artwork was to hold wine and display culturally relevant images. Okay, so you should have the whole section of the artwork facts and the artist facts filled out now. So let's continue. Okay, so Greece, y'all know where Greece is, located at the southeast part of Europe. The pottery was sold here and bought on, it's kind of, it's like spread all over Europe here after that. The images also represent figure to ground arts. It's a good representation of that. So let's talk about that really fast. The elements are perceived as either figure, which is the element of focus, or they're ground, either figure or ground. So here's a classic example of being able to swap the figure to ground section. So this one, if we look at the white part as the figure and this black becomes a background, we see two faces. But if we switch that and this black part becomes the figure and the white is the ground or the background, then that becomes this vase pedestal type object in the middle. So this is also another example. Photographers use figure to ground in their artwork and their pictures and stuff as well. You have a darker figure, then you need a lighter background. You don't want to put a dark figure, for example, on top of these dark trees. It would be hard to see and it would not stand out. Okay. How has figure to ground been used in this week's focus? Well, clearly they did dark figures on a light background, and that way the figures stood out. Okay, the Francois vase, is named after Alexandre Francois, who found the vase in 1854 BC over in Italy. Now, this is just the guy that discovered it. The Athenian volute crater dates from 575-65 BC. We talked about that. And it's signed by the potter Ergotimos and the painter Kalitas. Most vases from this time have retained the signatures of the painters. So that's how we know who did this. Their signatures are actually on it. The painters and potters were usually separate specialists, but not always. But in this instance, they were separate. Their signatures were often written as blank made me. This allowed specific artist styles to be studied. So let's look at some examples of potters' signatures real quick. Here they are. And it was usually in the form of, like I said, so-and-so made me. And it's kind of cute how they signed it. So this vase is an example of black figure pottery from the Attica Peninsula. So it's a historical region that encompasses the city of Athens, which is the capital of Greece, and it's a peninsula that's projecting into the Aegean Sea. Let's go look at that real quick. So here we are. Here is Athens. This whole area here is Greece, and we're going to focus in on this spot a little bit. Boom, there we go, a little closer. Let's get even closer than that. All right, and here is the Attica Peninsula, and here's Athens. We recognize Corinth over here from Bible cities that we have read about, which we're fixing to talk about in just a second. Here's an image, really cool place over in Athens. Here's obviously ancient part, and here's the more modern part down here. Thankfully, they have preserved all of this decently, so we can still go look at it. So here's Paul. I'm going to talk about Paul real quick. He had 3 journeys, as you know, and he went on one of his missionary journeys was over to Athens, actually. Okay, so in 49 AD, Paul was in Athens, and Acts tells us that his spirit was stirred when he noticed the city was totally given over to the worship of pagan gods. And he preached Jesus everywhere he went. And since the Greeks were people that really liked wisdom and knowledge and new things and new philosophies, when they heard him and they'd never heard this before, they were like, hey, we want to hear more about this. You know, this is really cool. Not necessarily because it was about Jesus Christ and they could get saved, but because it was some new knowledge and they wanted to hear about it. But Paul took advantage of that and accepted that invitation to go speak. So he went to Mars Hill and taught, and he used a monument that he had seen in their city. It was dedicated to the unknown God. So he used that as a springboard for teaching the Athenians about the true God, and said the stuff that this unknown God has done, it was actually done by the true God, the one true God that is above all of these other gods in your pagan city. So, and of course, as we can see from the pottery, obviously they had a lot of pagan traditions, pagan gods, pagan history that they supposedly had. And so that was definitely shown in their pottery decorations. Okay, the well-known black figure pottery emerged during the Oriental period. So this style came about a lot earlier, in the 700 to 550 BC, and had influences from the Egyptian culture, and that's where it kind of came from. The ancient Greek black figure pottery, named after the color of the depictions on the pottery, which we just said because they're black, it was first produced in Corinth, which was a very pagan city as well, around 700 BC, and then adopted by pottery painters in Attica, which is what we're talking about, where it would then be the dominant decorative style from 625 BC, and allowed Athens to dominate the Mediterranean pottery market for the next 150 years. And that's when this piece came to play, when at one of the heights of the popularity of this type of pottery. So evolving from earlier geometric designs on pottery, this black figure pottery depicted animals, which was more favored in Corinth, and then also human silhouette figures, which was more preferred in Athens, and in naturalistic detail. There are more than 20,000 of these surviving black figure vessels, and it's important to historians for a couple of reasons. So on your sheet where it said why this should be appreciated, here's some options you can write down there. It provides the oldest and most diverse representations of Greek mythology, religious, social, and sporting practices, as we said earlier. There's a lot of that stuff on here. And ancient pieces of pottery like the Francoise vase are also important tools in determining the chronology of ancient Greece. So there's a couple of reasons there. And of course, here's Corinth, where it kind of started, and Athens ended up being the major producer of this stuff later. Whew, sorry for my voice, y'all. Okay, the Francois vase was also decorated with 270 human and animal figures. Animals kind of acted like a Greek visual dictionary of all their myths. So there's something else you could put down as to why it's important. And it included scenes such as, now forgive me if I don't say these right, the Caledonian boar hunt, which we saw the large boar on there earlier. Theseus' triumphant return to Athens after slaying the Minotaur, Trojan War scene, centaurs getting rowdy at the wedding, and Olympian gods, and a few monsters like griffins and stuff on there too. The vase itself, here's kind of the height. It's about 25 inches high, so that's a little over 2 foot. So it's a pretty big vase, and to keep all their wine and stuff in. And the handle shows signs of having been repaired, but it's not known if the repairs were made in Greece or in Etruria. So, oops, yeah, here we go. Red figure pottery, real quick, just to let you know, red figure pottery also came about later, which was able to have more detail. And the only way that it's different from the black figure pottery, we won't talk a lot about this, is that the figures are red versus black. So the black figure pottery is black with red on it. The red figure pottery is red with black background. And they were able to have a lot more detail in this one. So it became a little more popular eventually. And you can also use some of this when if there's any aspects of this artwork that you'd like to experiment with, the question at the very bottom of your page. If you'd like to experiment with some of the figure to ground type artwork where you have one color figure and a dark figure in a lighter background, or a lighter figure in a darker background, you can experiment with that. If you also want to experiment with some of the images we saw on this pottery, you want to freeze this slide in a certain spot, or kind of look off of your own artwork and try to replicate some of these images like they did with the lighter lines inside of them, and try just different styles and techniques and see what works. You can do that. If you want to draw some of the animals on here too, that's fine. If you want to try to draw a container like this, you can do that as well. Practice that. So any of these things you can try to do as long as it has to do with this artwork itself. So make sure you fill in the personal opinions of the artwork and artist also. And like I said before with the mood and feeling, if you don't find the mood and feeling on here that kind of fits what you think this kind of gives you, then you can add one in there if you would like to do that. This makes you, the mood or feeling this gives to you is ancient. Well, that's fine too. You can put that in there and circle that instead. And the skillfulness of the artist, if you think they were skilled in doing this, I personally think they were. Were they successful in their purpose? I think they were extremely successful, considering that their purpose was probably to display a lot of the beliefs of that culture at that time and things that were relevant to them. And obviously a 2-foot tall container to hold your wine, I believe that was pretty successful as well. That's a pretty large container. And appreciated. Why do you appreciate it? We talked about that too, so you should have we had 3 options for that, so you should have plenty for that. And go ahead and fill out your page in your sketchbook. You should have both sides blank, and you're going to fill out the right side. You're going to fill out the left side with the title for the artwork and any other information you need up there. Glue your artwork down. Divide that side of the page, the left side, into 4 quadrants so you can do the 4 specific things you have to talk about, which are also listed right there on your page. And then on the right side of it, that's where you're going to write experimentation. Left side should be appreciation. Right side is experimentation. And on the right side, you need to just mess around with some of your experimental processes. Like we said, the black on the red or a light background, or the red on the dark background. You can play around with that, or figures, anything you want. And make sure you leave room at the bottom for you to glue your grade sheet. And don't forget your annotations, that as you do this, kind of write out beside it what you're doing and how you're doing it, what medium you're using. So, all right, that is it for this lesson. Make sure you set your sketchbook up and you are finished. I'll go ahead and leave it on this if you need this up to help you finish. All right, I will see y'all next week. Bye.